Yeah. Ready? The Choshech. Since everyone's watching the live stream, by the way, I'm done the Kazakhs. Yeah, unless the United is playing tonight or something. Yeah. So Parah calls to Moshe and he says, "Yeah, you can all go. You can all go. Just leave the animals behind." So Moshe says, "Not only will we not leave anything behind, you will give us. You'll give us more to take." And then, Parah changes his mind because the Kosh Baruch Hu hardens his heart. And Parah now says something he's never said before. Now, after Arba, the warning of Arba, he threw Moshe Rabbeinu out. It says, Vayigoresh Oisam. He threw them out, but then he asked them to come back, which he actually apologized for. And now for the second time, he throws him out, but this time he throws him out with a warning. And he says, Vayemele Parah lech me'olai. Go away from me. Hishomelecha, be careful. Al toisif ra'os panai, never to see my face again. Ki b'yoim ra'oscha panai Thomas. The day you see my face, you will die. He said, I'll execute you if you ever come back in here again. Now that was actually Parah not realizing it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe right at the beginning, V'lo yishma aleichem Parah. Parah won't listen to you. So the Orach HaKadosh says it means when it reaches the point where Parah doesn't want to hear from you anymore, that's the end. That's going to be the last thing, and then eventually, then the Klal Yisrael are going to come out. So Moshe says, "You're right. I'm not going to see you ever again." Now, Hashem now communicates with Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem el Moshe oid nega echad avi al Parah v'al Mitzrayim. There's one more plague I'm going to bring on Parah and Mitzrayim. And this time, when he throws you out, not just with you, it's all of you. When he sends you out, he's going to drive you out entirely from here. You're going out. He's going to kick you out with everybody else. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, now very important, please speak to the people, they should request Ishma Esra Ehu, a man from his colleague, V'isha Esra Usa, and a woman from her colleagues, Klei Kesef, Klei Zahav, silver and gold. So the big question, Chazal say, why does it say Daben No, please? Who would hold back Ari? Ari, if I'll say to you, go and borrow some gold and silver, or request some gold and silver, no, would you need encouraging? You'd be round at Eddie's place, gold and sterling, and say, no, come on, give me something. So why did it need Daben No? Because Baruch had to say to Moshe Rabbeinu, B'vakosha, please make sure they do this. So there's various good explanations, there's a lot of explanations on this. Moshe. But I saw one tonight. Why it was so important Klal Yisrael took out the wealth of Egypt with them. Says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, he said if they wouldn't have taken the wealth out, historians would say at a later date, as indeed they did, the Roman historians say, oh, the Egyptians just kicked out this nation, this despised nation from Egypt. They threw them out. They threw them out. That's what they would have said. And sure enough they did. The Roman historians said this. In fact, Josephus actually wrote a book against this Roman historian, and this is one of the points which he pointed out. But if they take the wealth of the nation with them, there's no way, if the Egyptians kick them out, there's no way the Egyptians would kick them out with all the wealth of Egypt. So that'll be the proof for history, that'll be the historical fact to prove it wasn't a slave breakout, they weren't thrown out, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took them out. So that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts the two together. Kashalchoi, when he sends you out, Gorish Eschem Mizeh, and the proof will be that I took you out. It wasn't just Parah getting rid of you, it's Daben No, make sure they take the gold and silver with it, that'll prove it. Now, I might have told you over this story. One Chol Hamoed Pesach, and I recommend this year, I don't know if you can do it, but well worthwhile. In the Albert Docks in Liverpool, they've got a slavery museum. Very fascinating to show what people in slavery, what they went through and how the slavery system worked and everything. Very interesting. And they've got, like, along the corridors, they've got little films of people who suffered modern day slavery. And they interviewed a woman who at the age of 2 or 3, or maybe even younger, her father sold her as a slave, or a maidservant if you like, to another family. So she was describing what she went through, and she said, the first time I knew I was a slave and not a daughter in the house was when the real children started calling her the slave. So part of being a slave is the title of being a slave. As a derogatory term, one is referred to. And then she described what it was like there. It doesn't seem she was mistreated, but she didn't have very much. And then she said something very profound. She said, when he kicked me out, when he got rid of me, she said she literally came out just with the clothes she was wearing, and that was it. There was no golden handshake, there was no thank you, no nothing. He just kicked it out. And then she said like this, and she's talking to the interviewer, and don't know what language it was, but had English subtitles. You see, today, and she points to it, I've got a house, my own home. She said, I've got my own clothes, and then she pointed to it, I've got my own jewellery. And she was just speaking in an interview. So my son was further down the corridor. I went running down the corridor. I said, Baruch David, come here, you've got to watch this film. I said, I've just capped something. So we watched it again. I said, now I understand why Avraham Avinu, this is the proof that it wasn't a slave breakout, and it was proof that Pharaoh didn't kick them out. Having your own jewellery, coming out with the wealth of Egypt, that is the proof you're truly a free man. And it wasn't because Pharaoh would never have given it. I said, her master just kicked her out with the clothes on her back, and that was it. And she said it exactly as it would have been. So the Daben Abaz near Arm is the historical proof for all generations. Nobody can have any false illusions. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out, and the proof was how they came out with the golden handshake. Now later on, the Torah says, when you have an Eved Ivri, when he leaves, you must give him a golden handshake. It says, Ha'anek ta'anek lo, mitzvahs ha'anaka. You got to give him a big sort of like thank you for all the years of work, although he owed you the money possibly, whatever it was. But you got to give him a bit of capital to stand on his feet. And it says, why Hanik Tanik twice? Because Baruch Hu says, do to him like I did to you. I gave you Bizas Mitzrayim and Bizas Hayam. You got a double payout. So you must do the same thing when you let a servant go free at the end of his term. Do like I did and give him this golden handshake. And he goes out there for Bekovadik. He doesn't go out just like he's booted out at the end of his time of serving. Okay. So this is amazing. The Ksaf Sofer, in one of his drashas, makes this observation. Vayitzin Hashem eschein ha'am be'einei Mitzrayim. Hashem put the favor of the eyes of the people in the eyes of the Egyptians. Not only that, so they were very forthcoming. Gam ha'ish Moshe gadol moed be'eretz Mitzrayim. Moshe was very respected by the Egyptians. So when they knocked on the door and said, Moses sent us to request some gold and silver, they were very forthcoming. Even Pharaoh's servants respected Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, Ksaf Sofer says like this. We know they'd already taken the Korban Pesach. They tied it to their beds from the 10th of Nisan. This was now, so they're in between these two times. They already knew about this. So they're beginning to reject the culture and the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim at the risk of death. Yeah. No one could hide from the Egyptians. For 4 days, they saw you walk through the street, they saw you had these sheep, and the Egyptians wanted to know what was going on, and they had to tell them. That's part of the thing of Shabbos HaGadol, the great nace. He said, look what happened when the Yidden, 210 years earlier, or 86 years earlier, started assimilating, started mixing with the Egyptians. It brings the Pasuk into Tehillim, Hafach libam lisnei Amor. The more they tried to copy the Egyptians, the more the Egyptians started hating them. He said, now when they started pulling away from Egyptian culture and rejecting the Avodah Zarah, the opposite happens. They now had a great chen. Hashem put the chen of the people in the eyes of the people. When we stick ourselves to ourselves and we keep what we're supposed to keep, we get respect from the Ummah Soila. When we come out of what we're supposed to be doing and try and emulate them, try and be with them, they remind us, you're Jews, go back. Quite incredible. It's happened throughout history. Whenever Jews have tried to blend in with the culture, because Baruch Hu makes it to preserve identity, the culture turns against us. But when we stick ourselves to ourselves and we maintain our unique identity, then the outside world has respect for that. Because why not? You're sticking to your guns. Why not? It's a very honourable thing to do, and they don't feel threatened. They don't feel we're coming into their into their territory. I told you this story once. I went to RAF Duxford with my kids. It's a museum near Cambridge, an Air Force museum. They got every single warplane from there, from the Sopwith, or whatever it was called in the First World War, to a B-52 bomber and an F-16, F-15 there on display. Quite amazing. Everything. Every single Concorde they first built when they were designing it. So, of course, we wanted to go on a Concorde. Small, narrow plane. It was the only thing about it was very quick, and you probably got a decent lunch on it. But it wasn't like business class where you get a lot of space or anything. It wasn't very fancy. Just you got to New York very quickly. That was the shtick. Very, very quickly. So, reading a newspaper, just making sure everyone went through orderly, he saw my sisters hanging out. So he put his newspaper down, and he said to me, "It's very nice you keep your customs." So I stopped, I smiled, I said, "Why?" He said, "Because if you don't keep them," he said, "they'll get forgotten." Very interesting, you know what I mean? He had an appreciation. Oh, you keep... He respected that. So here as well, when Klal Yisrael started living the way we're supposed to live, Hashem put the favour of the Mitzvim in their eyes, and Chazal even say, if they asked for one, the Mitzvah gave them two. He said, "Hey, no, take more, take more." Because that's how it goes. When we do what we're supposed to do, the Goyim respect us. We're doing what we're doing, supposed to do. They should do what they're supposed to do. It works very well. But when we come and cross the boundary, that's when, to preserve us, Kosh Baruch has to send them to push us back. Okay. Now, something never happened before, happened now. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared, the Shekhinah appeared in Paro's palace. So it says, Vayomer Moshe, Koyam Hashem, Kachatzois Halayla, about this time tomorrow night, Ani Yotzei B'Soich Mitzrayim, I personally about Chatzos. Okay, the clocks. But what did Moshe really care if they changed the clocks? So who cares? Yeah. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And what's going to happen? Every firstborn will die in Mitzrayim. Sitting on his throne, who will sit on the throne, the crown prince. Ad Bechor Hashivcha, down, right down to the Bechor of the maidservant. Asher Achad Bechol Bechor Behema, every firstborn animal. Now, a few lines from here, we have to understand what's going on now. Because it says later, V'chol Elohei Mitzrayim Eser Shavot, to wipe out all the Avodah Zaras of Egypt. Now, Rashi, it says, Ba'omdo lifnei Paroi ne'em in front of Paroi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, now today, I'm never going to see you again. Normally you got the Nevuah outside the town. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, once he there was a reason. Blood on their doorposts. Tell us who survived. There was one Bechor. How did Paris? So the blood was, yes, so the mash angels who accompanied saw that's a Jewish had that shirts palace put such a kedusha into from the Malach HaMashkes. Was the Shekhinah appearing? He said the although the Shekhinah left after the Nevuah ended, he said the Shekhinah coming in left a protective shield. He says that's why Moshe says to Paroi on that night. He said, "Not you." He says, "Your servants will come running for me, telling me to clear out, go out." So Chazal say, "Tell me." But says Rabbi Yonasan Eibishter, no. He said Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want Paro to leave his palace. It would be extremely dangerous for him to leave. While he was in the palace, he had the protection of the fact that Shekhinah had appeared in the palace. It would protect him. Moshe Rabbeinu knew if Paro comes out, he's in danger. So he said, your servants will come out. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was telling him, when it comes to it, send yourself. He said, because he would lose. Moshe was afraid he would lose that protection. Now, he says like this. Paro, till now, has allowed his people to suffer the beast, and he still stubbornly refused to allow the Yidden to leave. He said, in this final plague, Paro will come to understand that Hashem is really not just the God of Yisrael, of the Hebrews, he's the God over the whole earth. Natural creation. He has caused his servant Moshe to announce the successive plagues and brought them to pass in an invincible sequence and growing severity, when Paro ever more persistently refused to acknowledge Hashem in the face of the clearest credentials of his authority and power. In this final plague came the most explicit sign of Hashem's precise and full control, the death of the firstborn by only killing the Bechorim. Nor did it come without adequate warning, and Paro had every opportunity to acknowledge Hashem and obey him, but he had to take the consequence of refusal. Now, you have to understand what was a Bechor in the time of the Torah. A Bechor just wasn't just the oldest child, it was much more than that. In the ancient Near East, the firstborn child was not only an heir of a double portion of his father's inheritance. Interesting. It's din Torah that a Bechor gets a Pishnayim. It was very common in those days, but represented special qualities of life. He said, the law of primogeniture decreed that the major portion of a family estate would be inherited by the Bechor when the father died. The death of a Bechor son would cripple a family legally and emotionally. He said, this plague now was too selective to be merely a child epidemic. A plague on children, which happens from time to time, doesn't differentiate between a Bechor and not a Bechor. It destroyed only the Egyptian firstborn, whether human and animal, while the entire population of Klal Yisrael were exempt from this plague. He said, how many Mitzrayim knew of what Moshe had warned and spent the entire night watching their children? He said, the plague reminds us of how the Mitzrayim murdered the Hebrew baby boys to prevent the nation from growing. He said, the fact it says no dog will bark, and I found this in the Ksava Kabbalah, he says this chat, he said, suggests that all would be calm in Goshen on that night. There was nothing untoward, no screaming, no noise at all in Goshen where the Yidden were. He said, since Hashem had shown clearly in the previous Makos he could distinguish between Klal Yisrael and the Mitzrayim, the blood placed on the doors of the houses of Klal Yisrael wasn't for Hashem. It was to function both as a sign that they were part of Hashem's people, but also as a seal or a means for Hashem's protection from the Makkah. So we know that even Paro's house was affected, okay? And there's a big debate which Paro in history was it. So some say Ramesses the first and Ramesses the second. There's a big debate who it was. He said the Makkah marked the beginning of the Pesach celebration. The blood of the lamb would signify that they had listened to Hashem's mitzvah. The Chomos would remind them that they were sent out quickly. The Morah would symbolize the bitterness of their time in Egypt. In years to come, every time they would celebrate Pesach, they would recall their former position as slaves and be reminded that Hashem had redeemed them, which is exactly the avodah of Seder night. And then he says something very interesting. He said, here we read that Hashem has decided that history determines the calendar, and in particular the history of Hashem saving us in Mitzrayim does that. Hashem decreed, he said, that from now on the calendar will be designed to remember how we came out of Mitzrayim and became a people. He said that's why it always has to fall in the spring. Like it was then, Chodesh HaAviv they came out. The Torah says later on, always make sure Pesach falls in the spring. He said, now this wasn't knocked out every Avodah Zarah in one go. He said, this final plague was directed against Chol Elahei Mitzrayim. He said, the death of all the firstborn would show the total inability of the Avodah Zarahs in Mitzrayim to protect them. Paro himself was considered Avodah Zarah amongst his people. He said, so he was worshipped. He said, and now they saw how the son was knocked out with the ninth plague, and now Paro's son, the heir to his throne, will be killed. This is a blow to Paro's person, his kingship, and his divinity. Paro rose at night, he and all his servants, all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Mitzrayim. Not one house was not affected. This is an amazing chat, he says. In chapter Gimel, when the Paro at the time was particularly nasty, he died and was particularly nasty to the Yidden, Hashem's people cried out to him for deliverance, and Hashem listened to their tefillah. On this night, the Mitzrayim would cry out to Paro, but he would not be able to act. The people who at the one time bowed before Paro would now bow with respect before Moshe. Right, then he goes on, he explains goes through all the different avodah zaros. He gives the whole long list, and then he said, he brings at the end of it, he brings a Ramban. Ramban says it's very significant that the Makos took place on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, because in the month of Nisan is the Mazel Tleh, which was worshipped by the Egyptians, and the 15th of the month is, and therefore he said that ought to have given the most protection for them who worship the sheep, and in one go HaKadosh Baruch Hu knocked it all out. He said, we're commanded to slaughter the sheep and to eat it in order to inform us that it was not by the power of the Mazel that we came out of Mitzrayim, but it was by the Gezer of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kunze Chazal, the Egyptians worshipped it, and in one go HaKadosh Baruch Hu subdued all their avodah zaros and all their powers at the height of their ascendancy. So it's not for nothing, it's the 15th of the month. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. My father's kind of Racha told me this from his Rebbe, Rafael Shvangel. He said, the Gemara says an eclipse of the moon is a bad sign for Klal Yisrael. And an eclipse of the sun is a bad sign for the Goyim. So he said his Rebbe, now an eclipse of the moon can only take place on the 15th of the month, on a full moon. So it's very interesting, there's many months in the year where there's a mitzvah to be done, big mitzvahs to be done on the 15th of the month. And he suggested it could be that in case there's an eclipse of the moon on the middle of the month, the mitzvah, which Klal Yisrael would do at that time of the month, would be a shemira, a protection for Klal Yisrael. Now, in particular, the first Pesach, we know this, that the dam, by being Moshe Nefesh. Now, where exactly did they put the blood? On the inside of the door posts or the outside? Eli, where did they put them on? The inside of the door posts or the outside of the door posts?
What?
The blood on the
outside.
The outside or the inside? Who thinks it was on the outside? Put your hand if you think it was the outside.
Definitely the outside.
What's the big difference?
It's definitely the inside.
So right. So what's the difference? Yes, what's the difference? So if it's on the outside, it's going to rub the Egyptians' noses in it more. They will see Klal Yisrael taking the blood of their avodah zarah and splits it on the door. It splashes it on the door. If it's on the inside, then it's just for Klal Yisrael's benefit, for the Malach to see there's blood there and avoid that house. So there's actually a machlokes in the Mechilta. The first opinion Rashi brings that it says V'haya Dom Lochem. It's for you a sign. It's on the inside, but Rabbi Yitzchak holds it was taken on the outside. Some Rishonim learn like that as well. It was on the outside, and it makes a lot more sense now in a way. To show the Mitzrayim we have shechted your avodah zarah, and this is what we think of it. We'll splodge the blood all over the house. So not only were they Moshe Nefesh in taking it, and now, how do you eat your Korban Pesach? How does it have to be prepared? It's got to be roasted. You can't cook it. Eli, what's the difference between cooked meat and roasted meat? Same carbon, isn't it?
Smells.
Go on. The smell of roasted meat wafts further than cooked meat. So every mitzvah, no one could hide here, pretend he didn't have it, in his house. The roasting of the meat, probably done outside as well, in a special oven. It's going to be roasted in a special way. He said the smell would have gone everywhere. It was literally to rub the mitzvah's noses in it. This is what we think of your avodah zarah. Total rejection of your biggest avodah zarah. Complete bittul. And Klal Yisrael were Moshe Nefesh for it. And in that zechus, they came out. Okay. So now, Moshe Rabbeinu describes what's going to happen. He says, "V'hoisa tza'aka gedola b'chol eretz Mitzrayim." There's going to be a great cry throughout Mitzrayim. Asher kamoyu lo niyasa, where in times of peace there's never been anything like it before. V'chamoyu lo soisav, it will never happen again. And then he says something very strange about the dogs barking. L'chol b'nei Yisrael lo yechratz kelev l'shoynoi l'mei'ish v'ad behema. No dog will bark against any man or any dog, any animal. L'man teidon, so you will see, you Mitzrayim will see. Asher yafle Hashem, Hashem will differentiate Vein Mitzrayim or Vein Yisrael. What's the significance of the dogs not barking? Dogs. What's the significance of dogs not barking? So some say it's to do with the Malach HaMavos. Yeah, the Gemara says when the Malach HaMavos comes to town, dogs bark. So tonight, to show HaKadosh Baruch Hu's coming and not the Malach HaMavos, therefore the dogs won't bark. That's one explanation. Ramosha Sternbuch says something brilliant. Harry, listen carefully. He said when Moshe Rabbeinu got slandered on by Dosan Aviram and he had to run for his life to Midian, he said, "Achei noida hadav." He said, "Now I know why the Jews have been enslaved. They speak in Lashon Hara about each other." Do you know they say in COVID? Yeah, even the police were not very happy about. They say that's what they say. There was a lot of massacring. That's what they say. Exactly what? Don't even know exactly what, but they say there was. Moshe Rabbeinu said it's a problem. It's the problem of they're saying Lashon Hara about each other. So it says in Moshe Sternbuch, the Gemara says somebody who speaks Lashon Hara, Roy lashlicha leklovim, deserves to be thrown to the dogs. So he says dogs, it's like his tongue's waggling in use the whole time. So it symbolizes someone who speaks Lashon Hara, his tongue is wagging the whole time. On the 10th of the month, on Rosh Chodesh, they were told what's going to happen in 2 weeks' time. Everybody kept the secret. Not one mitzvah found out what they were going to do in 10 days' time and 14 days' time. So what had Kaisar shown? They'd learnt to keep their mouths closed. So that was symbolized by the dogs not barking. That would be proof Kaisar rectified the sin of Lashon Hara, where Moshe Rabbeinu said that it's because of that. That's why they're in dogs, which symbolize Lashon Hara, won't bark in the night he sees Mitzrayim. Okay, so Moshe Rabbeinu tells Paro, all your servants will come to me in your name. They're going to bow down in respect, and they're going to say, you and all the people who follow you go out. Not immediately, a little bit later in the morning, 8 hours ago, and then Moshe Rabbeinu turned around, and there's an opinion in the Medrash. He walked up to Paro, slapped him across the face, and walked out. It says, Paro. He walked out from Paro in anger. For the first time, he got Paro really angry. Gave him a gesunter zetz. Now, why did Paro have to say go? And sure enough, on the night he sees Mitzrayim, later on at Shishi, it says, Vayokam Paro Laila, and he said, go out, Gamatem, Gamanisol, take all your animals, everything, just go, 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 go. Why did Paro have to say that? And the answer is, Eli, let's test your knowledge of contract law. If I make a deal with you, Eli, that I have to supply you, I don't know, every week with a ton of gold for 10 weeks. So, Eli, how many weeks do I have to supply it for?
10 weeks.
That's right. What if after 6 weeks, I can't do it anymore? So what's going to happen? You'll either sue me for breach of contract, or I can say to you, Eli, do me a favour, tear up the contract, just call it a day and finished. So you could do that, yeah? You can say, you know what, you paid 6 weeks, go, forget the rest, and go. That's there's two options, yeah? You either sue him for breach of contract, or you can get him to be mochel you if you can't see it out. Says the Netzir, Paro had a contract for 400 years. Paro was given the contract. They were coming after 210. So Kodesh Baruch Hu had to get Paro to relinquish the contract, tear up the contract. So Paro had to say, Tzu, he had to officially give permission, you don't have to keep the rest of the 190 years. So that's why Moshe Rabbeinu said to him, you're going to say it? Say it. He gave official reshus for them to go. It had to be with this reshus. Now, just about midnight and about midnight. Now, it was on the stroke of midnight. So the Gemara says, yeah, the Stagnine Paroi might have their clocks wrong. So the Rebbeinu B'chai says, why was Moshe Rabbeinu so big deal? He says, no. He said, each time the Chatzumim, their emunah that Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the truth was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it now reached its perfection with the warning of Makos B'chorus. So had Moshe Rabbeinu not stood up to it, to make sure they don't make this error of judgment, he said it would attack and ruin the entire impact on the Chatzumim. So therefore, he had to be spot on. He also says it's connected to the Mazolos. He says, in the hours of the day, he says at midnight, if I'm not mistaken it was Thursday night, he sees Mitzrayim, the Mazel Madim, at midnight, it goes over from Mazel Tzedek to Mazel Madim. Now, Mazel Tzedek is like the Mazel of life, and Mazel Madim is the Mazel of death. So it actually happened right between the two. But had it happened in a second after midnight, they would have said it's to do with the mazel. They wouldn't have said it's Hashem. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, Kachat, so it's just before the mazel of life ends, that's when their life is going to end. Against the mazel. The mazel was still mazel tzedek, which apparently is the mazel of indicates life. And at that precise moment, while that mazel is still there, Hashem's going to kill the firstborns to show this is nothing to do with the mazolos, this is the hand of Hashem. So Moshe Rabbeinu worded it in a way that they would understand that. Okay, it was to do with the mazolos, not the actual stroke of midnight was the problem. It was they should understand this was not kishuf, this was not playing around with mazel, this was the hand of Hashem. Now, let's just take a little jump before we finish off. It says, when it happened. So it says, Vayakam Paro Laila. This is Paro in pajamas in the middle of the night. This is what it happened, yeah? Vayakam Paro Laila. Vayi B'chatzi Laila at the stroke of midnight. Now, we can't split time. On our clocks, it goes 11:59:59. Then it goes 12. What happens next? It goes 12:01, I think, doesn't it? Yeah? I think it goes 12:00. Does it go 12:00? I think it goes 12:01. Starts the first second of the next thing. So, but Kosh Baruch can split time. We can't, but we've got to give a sort of define a second at least. But Kosh Baruch did it on the dot of midnight. Okay, and they all died. Everyone died. But Chazal say it went further. Now I saw an amazing pshat. I can't remember if I saw it today. It said that Kosh Baruch just took out all the firstborns. The Malachi Chavola, which went with him, the Mashchis, and we say it on Seder night, Evrov, Ozai, they went around all the other houses of Egypt and gave them, they had other problems. So that's why the Eden needed the blood. It wasn't for Kosh Baruch to jump over, he knows he was Jewish, but for any other problems which the Malachi Chavola was sent against the Egyptian houses, they needed to know where to avoid and where they could or couldn't go. So he says, Chazal tell us that absolutely every house was affected. Sometimes 10 people died in a house because the Egyptians were not very moral, and there could be 10 firstborns from 10 different men and things like that. And if there was no Bechor, the Gadol Shebabayis, the most senior member of the house, died. If there was no Bechor in the house, they used to bury, sometimes the Bechor died, the dogs came and dug up the Bechorim and took them out of the grave. So as if they just died now. So there was not one house in Mitzrayim which was not affected. And he says whether it was a Bechor Me'av from the father or a Bechor Me'aim. So that on Tanis Bechor, it's a Takish statement in Shulchan Aruch. Whether you're a Bechor from your father, Bechor from your mother, you fast. Because that has to mirror exactly what happened in Mitzrayim. So the words are and exactly as Moshe described, now the first Gulf War, I was in Yerushalayim in 1991, and the yeshiva was sealed off, so the normal Bar Korah couldn't come. Parshas boy. So being my Bar Mitzvah Sedra, I volunteered to lane. So we davened, because we slept in the base of Medrash, literally on the bench like the old days. We davened Nates, and as we got to Shishi, so I started laying Shishi. As I got to this posuk, the air raid siren went off. There was an atkafa, there was an attack. I thought, how ironic, I just read these words, and there was a rocket coming over. It took 3 or 4 minutes to come from Iraq, and who knows where it would land. So I looked up at the Rosh Yeshiva, and he reminded me of the halacha, laying a third pasuk. You can't start lesson 3, so I laid the third pasuk, Vayakam Paralayla. The next one, Vayikra Moshe, I stopped, the guy made a thing, everybody got the gas mask, and you waited for the all clear. So I realised there's going to be an extra aliyah. So I thought, being my Bar Mitzvah Sedra, I'll ask the Gabba, can I have an aliyah? The Rosh Hashiva normally allocated the aliyahs, but I figured now there was a spare one, so I asked for it. So he laughed, he said, the Rosh Hashiva already allocated you Shvi. So anyway, I was going to get my aliyah, but we got the Haisofa, because we had to pull up at Shvi, 3 psukim after Shishi, rather than the normal place. Okay, then exactly what happened. It went to plan, and it says to be very interesting. The Yidden had done exactly as Moshe had told them. They borrowed silver and gold and clothes. And Chazal say the clothes were more. The question is, Ari, how can clothes be more valuable than silver and gold? So, Ari, what would you say? He says they took silver and gold and clothes from the Mitzrayim. And Rashi means the Chazal, the clothes were more valuable than the silver and the gold. How can that be? So what would you say? Probably. It's about diamond clothes, but it's probably... Right. So the Ksav Sofer says, yeah, Egyptian cotton, Egyptian linen is the best in the world. The Kohen Gadol's clothes on Yom Kippur, the big deal oven came from Ramses. And the Ksav Sofer says they took them out and they wore them on Shabbos. They used them as Shabbos clothes. So now it makes a lot more sense. Yeah? If you're really, really on the Madrega, yeah, what you use for a mitzvah is worth more than gold and silver. So Taka, the clothes were more valuable. But you could also say maybe in a desert. Gold and silver is not much use to you in a desert, but clothes are useful in a desert. That could also be more practical. So he says, if you look at the Aseret Dibros, the reason for Shabbos is given in Yisroi to remember Ma'aseh Bereshis, and in Bois Chanan to remember Zachar to Kiev you were a slave in Mitzrayim. So he said the clothes, they used to wear them on Shabbos to fulfill the mitzvah, to remember they were slaves in Mitzrayim, by wearing the clothes which they took out from Mitzrayim. And I think this is the real source for wearing a kittel on Seder night. It's nothing to do with Big Day Mason and all these things. And it's supposed to somehow show Simcha. I don't know how to show Simcha in a kittel. I never quite understood it. But the real reason is they took out of Mitzrayim white clothes. You go to a Sephardi country, they understand what white clothes are all about. Very often they wear them on Shabbos. A lot of the Mekubalim were makpid only to wear white on Shabbos. Don't wear anything, any dark colour. So every year on Seder night they wore the clothes they took out of Mitzrayim to remember and they walked out with these white clothes, probably wearing them.
Yeah.
So later on in Europe, when clothes went different, you don't wear gowns like in the Arab countries, hot countries. The only white clothes they had to commemorate was the kittel, so they wore the kittel Seder night. It was just to remember the white clothes which you took out of Mitzrayim. I'm fazikh, I haven't found anyone says it, but I'm sure that's the real Makos of wearing white on Seder night. It happens to be nowadays. That's the only white clothes we got. So people wear a kittel. But that's the real Makos. It's to remember exactly as we came out. So that's why you put fancy things on the table to remember the gold and the silver, and the white clothes was to remember the white clothes with which they came out of Mitzrayim. Okay, we'll stop there. And tomorrow night, B'li just a few more Nekudas on Makos B'chayres, we'll do some halachas relevant to this year on Pesach.
Yeah.
Yeah,